You wake one morning and the world seems the same size, but you move through it differently. Careful at the edges, preferring the hallway you know to the street you might once have explored. At first it felt like sensible narrowing. Fewer hassles, more control. Later you noticed the quieter things that stopped arriving. The floated invitation you didn't answer, the coffee you let slip, the route you avoided because the thought of someone you might run into felt like extra weight. Each small omission is polite, almost invisible, and together they draft an architecture that's unmistakably smaller than the life you remember. There's no single dramatic moment, no scene of collapse. Instead, there's a series of soft retreats, a polite decline here, an extra hour on the couch there. Anxiety does not pound on the door. It rearranges the furniture so that leaving feels a little harder, and then a little harder still. You learn to call that relief. Comfort becomes the proof that you're keeping yourself safe. But safety, pursued like this, thins the things that used to make you feel wide. Impromptu laughter, messy afternoons, a half-done plan that turned into an unforgettable night. This film asks you to notice what you have been quietly giving up. Not to shame you, but to name the subtle rule that has governed your days. You prioritize avoidance because it reduces immediate discomfort. That logic is understandable and often wise. Yet noticing how much smaller your world has become is, surprisingly, an act of resistance. When you can name the small concessions, when you can answer the single question, what did I stop doing, and when did it happen? You begin to see the seams. If any of this feels familiar, if you recognize the slow narrowing in your own life, pause here. Like this moment if it resonates. You are not alone in this quiet retreat. There is a small, attentive community waiting to hold these stories, not to fix them overnight, but to mark them and to begin, gently, to widen things again. You wake before your phone now, not because the world demands it, but because staying still has its own momentum. The day arrives as a series of small decisions. One coffee you don't buy, one street you choose not to cross, one friend you tell you're tired. None of them read like loss. Each feels practical, sensible. The economy of effort, the polite retreat. Anxiety does not storm your house. It rearranges the furniture so subtly you only notice when the room feels smaller. You remember a time when choosing felt like opening a door. Now choices are filters. They sort you into what is safe and what is not, and you meet your limits with a quiet nod. There is a strange relief in the shrinking. You save energy, avoid embarrassment, sidestep friction. For a while that restraint is a kind of victory. It keeps you unburned. But victory has a cost. Over months, then years, the edges of who you are become less distinct. Hobbies blur. Your calendar grays. Conversations that once surprised you now feel like errands. The life that was wide and messy and dangerous thins at the corners until you catch yourself from the outside, a photograph with the color drained. This grief is modest. It does not demand sympathy. It is private and soft, the sort of sadness you can carry in a coffee mug. Still, it matters. Noticing the shrinkage is not failure. It is a first resistance. There is power in naming the small withdrawals, the invitation you declined, the bus stop you avoided, the line you didn't cross. Ask yourself the question the film keeps at its center. What did you stop doing, and when did it happen? The answer is less a verdict and more a map. If any of this sits with you, if you feel the room sliding in, like to say you see it too. Comment one thing you paused. You are not the only one who has learned to stay safe. There are others holding the same question, and together the small returns feel less lonely. Block 3 of 14. You begin to notice the pattern in the quiet moments, the soft architecture of how your life has narrowed. It is not a single thunderbolt, but a procession of tiny choices. One missed coffee that becomes two, a text unanswered that becomes an unanswered stream, a street you take around the park because the other one feels too exposed. Each avoidance is polite, almost considerate, of your comfort, your energy, so it hardly registers as loss. Still, when you look back, there are corridors that used to be rooms. There is a peculiar grief to this thinning, quiet and precise, like the slow erasure of a pencil sketch. You traded breadth for safety and were pleased at first. Relief arrived like a warm blanket. Routines that seemed small became trophies of survival. You learned to value the hours you could predict. The world outside those hours, however, receded. Invitations became windows you stopped opening. Friendships softened at the edges, The person you were on a spontaneous Tuesday afternoon grew dimmer. Anxiety does not need to shout to be sovereign. It settles in as preference, an honest-seeming rule you adopt to avoid friction. Over time, preference hardens into boundary. Boundary becomes habit, and habit rearranges the map of your life. You do not recognize the shape until your own footsteps echo in rooms that used to be crowded with possibility. This is not a failure. It is a human strategy that has outlived its usefulness. Naming it is the first small act of rebellion. To ask, quietly and with no dramatics, "What did I stop doing, and when did it happen?" is to open a door you had long been sliding shut. Notice the texture of the losses, a laugh you no longer make, a line in a crowded subway you no longer cross, the way daylight looks different when you're not sharing it. If this feels like you, hold that recognition softly. If you find yourself nodding, give this a like, an agreement that you are seen. And know you are not doing this alone. Others are noticing the same slow shrinkage. Find the community that understands the gentle work of widening again, one careful step at a time. You learn, slowly, how to make less of a life feel like enough. At first it's practical. One less coffee with a friend, one evening on the couch instead of the bar, but these small refusals begin to feel less like choices and more like rules you follow without knowing why. The coat that used to come off at a doorstep stays buttoned, calls go unanswered until they die, and you find a route home that avoids the intersection where people laugh loudly. Each avoidance is polite, reasonable. Anxiety doesn't need theatrics. It arranges your days like a careful house guest, placing things where you won't reach them. You adapt. That adaptation reads like progress, safety, stability, fewer surprises. There is a relief in minimizing risk, a tidy comfort in fewer plans. And yet, as if in the negative space of a photograph, something important is missing, the breadth you used to have. You notice the shrinking in the margins. Invitations pile up into a list you don't open. An old hobby sits in boxes, waiting. Even your voice in conversations has learned to take smaller turns, to tuck itself into quieter corners. This is a modest grief, the kind that has no public face. It is private and incremental, so gradual that you might not have a single moment to point to and say, "This was the turning." Still, you can ask the question the film asks. What did you stop doing, and when did it happen? The question is small, like a key. It doesn't demand heroic answers. It only asks you to look at the map of your days and notice the routes you no longer take. Notice is not the same as sudden courage. It's the first, patient resistance. To notice is to begin to return, in the gentlest sense. One deliberate step down a street you'd been avoiding, one phone call returned, one coffee accepted even if you plan to leave early. These are not big leaps. They are careful expansions, exercises in reclaiming space. If this speaks to you, if you recognize the quiet shrinkage, like to say you see it, share and join others in this small community where noticing is the first shared act of hope. You start to notice it in the margins, the invitations that arrive and sit unread, the neighborhood corner you used to take and now skirt, the friend whose messages you answer with careful, late sentences. At first it feels like prudence, self-care in hyphenated form, and you congratulate yourself for being sensible. Then the sensation changes tone. The air around your days grows narrower, like a room where furniture has been slowly moved inward, not with malice, but with a kind of practical efficiency. The world is not closing. You are folding away from it. There is no thunderclap. Anxiety is bureaucratic. It writes polite memos and expects compliance. It convinces you that staying home is a solution, that saying no is noble, that avoiding will protect you. Each avoided coffee, each declined walk, each rerouted errand rearranges the architecture of your life, and you learn the routes of small retreats until they feel like the only sensible map. You adapt. That adaptation is not triumph or failure, simply a redesign carried out in soft materials. Habit, 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 until your days sit inside thinner walls. Ask yourself when the rooms got smaller. What did you stop doing, and when did it happen? Try to name the moment without shame, only curiosity. There is a quiet courage in noticing. It takes attention to see the contour of a life being altered by preference rather than crisis. Noticing does not undo the shrinking, but it resists the erasure. It creates a slim margin of possibility, an opening where the next choice might be different. You do not have to leap into grand gestures. The next chapter, if it comes, will be more like a series of small unclosures, a single doorway eased open, a short walk taken twice, a coffee accepted even if you arrive early and leave a little sooner. If this feels like you, if this passage clicks in your chest when you read it, let that recognition sit for a moment. Like this if it resonates. Know that others are folding and unfolding in quiet solidarity. There is a community of small returns waiting to be found. You begin to notice the shrinkage not as a catastrophe, but as a series of polite retreats. The coffee you didn't meet for that could have been mourning. The birthday you declined because it felt like too many faces. The street you learned to avoid because the rhythm of others made your chest tighten. Each choice is small, courteous almost, and because nothing collapses spectacularly, you let them go as if you were pruning a plant, tidy, sensible, until the plant is no longer the same shape you remember. There's a quiet architecture to this retreat. It's made of thresholds you stop crossing, of friendships stored in the soft part of your phone screen, of routes you redraw to exclude the possibility of being seen. Anxiety doesn't need a storm to take territory. It prefers the slow, polite renovation of your days. It replaces doors with filters. What used to be an open hallway becomes a slit of light you enter only when you're certain you won't be noticed. You adapt. You learn to like the safety of small rooms. Relief arrives like a warm shawl. But there is cost. The rooms, lovingly arranged, grow fewer. You are not failing at bravery. You are learning a new grammar of staying alive, one that prioritizes survival over risk. Still, there is loss here that doesn't declare itself dramatic. It is the kind of grief that passes for mundane. The songs you stopped singing aloud, the classes you said you'd join next week, the invitations you cataloged and then quietly removed. Notice this without judgment. To notice is already a form of resistance. So ask yourself, slowly, as if turning a key you've forgotten, what did you stop doing, and when did it happen? Let the question sit. If this feels like your life, nod to it. Quiet agreement is a kind of honesty. If you find yourself recognizing these small concessions, like this film as a soft yes, and share one tiny thing you stopped doing. There are others here, listening, who will nod back. You remember how doors used to feel like doors, possibilities with a hinge, not a gate you had to talk yourself through. Somewhere along the way the hinges learned to whisper. You stop at the threshold of a plan and tell yourself it's okay to turn back. The world hasn't changed, only the distance you're willing to travel inside it. A missed coffee becomes an unremarked pattern. An RSVP left unanswered folds into the same small, quiet habits that start to look, from the inside, like safety. It isn't dramatic. Anxiety doesn't drag you to the floor. It shows you the gentleness of retreat. It trades in the polite language of excuses, tired, busy, later. Each one feels sensible, even compassionate toward a self that wants less friction. Progress, for a while, is staying home and arranging the cushions just so. You learn the comforting geometry of rooms that fit your new edges. But edges sharpen into borders. You notice it not as a revelation, but as a thinning of invitations, of street names you stop taking, of the people who become characters in the background of your life. There's a soft grief in that noticing, an elegy without witnesses. It is modest and precise. The lost joys were small, but they were yours. You feel yourself receding from the person you used to be, not with fireworks, but with quiet, consistent undose. And yet noticing is already a kind of resistance. To ask, in a late hour, what did I stop doing, and when did it happen, is to open a map. You do not have to force yourself into grand acts of courage. Return can be patient, a single street walk, a brief yes to coffee, a voice message left unfinished no more. Each small step asks only that you allow more room again. If this hits a note inside you, let that recognition be enough for now. If it resonates, tap like as a small nod of agreement. You are not alone in this quiet. Come into the conversation. Share a single thing you miss. There is already a community waiting to remember how to widen again, one careful return at a time. You wake into smaller days without a single dramatic moment to blame. There is no headline, no collapse. Instead, the rooms of your life rearrange themselves in quiet increments. A coffee you didn't meet for becomes a loose thread you don't quite pick up. A street you used to walk around becomes a map with a missing line. An invitation you once would have accepted is answered with an easy, almost polite no. Each choice feels sensible. Each concession feels like the rational thing to do. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the field of possible things you might do grows narrower. You learn to be grateful for comfort. You learn to praise prudence. You learn to prefer sitting to the faint, pricking anxiety of leaving. There is relief inside these small decisions, and relief is a convincing argument. So you adapt. You build habits that save you from a particular unease and, at the same time, carve away a little of your own capacity for surprise. The life that remains is safer, yes, and quieter, gentler at the edges, but also less you. What did you stop doing, and when did it happen? Ask the question slowly, like breathing into a room you haven't been in for a while. You might not find one night, only a series of smaller closings. The last time you let your plans dissolve into an evening of solitude, the first time you said no and felt no urge to explain. Naming those moments does not require heroism. It requires attention. Noticing is a kind of resistance. It is not a dramatic return, but the beginning of a patient undoing. There is hope in recognition, an invitation to take a single, gentle step back toward life's edges. You do not have to sprint to reclaim everything. You can lean toward one small thing you used to do and see how it feels. If this feels familiar, you are not alone. Lend your quiet agreement, a like, a small click of recognition, and stay. There are others here, gathering the same questions and the same slow answers. Share a memory, no need for grandness. Find the soft company of people who are learning to widen again, one small, steady step at a time. You learn to measure your days by the doors you stopped opening. It begins in small, polite refusals, the coffee you let go, the party you invent an excuse for, the route you choose because it keeps you out of sight. Each avoidance is not dramatic. It is an efficiency, an optimization of discomfort into safety. You tell yourself this is growth. It feels like maturity. But somewhere, a geometry of absence takes shape. Rooms you used to walk through grow narrower. The map of your life shrinks at the edges. You remember when choices were doors, not filters. Back then, the world had depth. Now it flattens into pathways you have pre-approved for ease. Anxiety never needed thunder to rule you. It asked for permission, your permission, to prefer ease over risk, solitude over noise, the known over the possibility that you might be okay even if things are unfamiliar. You complied so politely that the surrender felt like progress. There is a small, private grief in that compliance. It is not dramatic enough to name to others. It lives in the quiet places, the bookshelf of unread invitations, the calendar with empty squares, the phone that knows you less than you used to know yourself. You discover that absence is not always loud. It can be a thinning at the edges, a translucence where once there was color. Noticing this is not failure. It is a kind of resistance. When you ask, with gentleness rather than accusation, what did I stop doing? When did it happen? You open a door without forcing it. That question is a small hinge. It does not demand big leaps. It invites careful, deliberate returns. Relearning to cross a street without rehearsing an exit strategy. Answering a text without planning an escape. Saying yes to a single coffee and standing with whatever follows. If this lands with you, hold it there for a moment. If it resonates, a simple like is a quiet agreement that you are seen. You are not the only one tracing these smaller maps. There are others, slowly, carefully, trying on wider rooms again. Find them. Share the question. Breathe. Take one small step back toward a life that feels like yours. You notice the pattern in the small things first, the absent answer to a message, the coffee you said you'd meet for and then didn't, the turn you take to avoid the block that once meant nothing. These are not grand betrayals. They are courteous. They bow out before you have to make a scene. They make safety feel tidy. Over time, tidy becomes habit, habit becomes home, and home begins to feel like a smaller map. You tell yourself good stories about it. You're protecting energy, you're being sensible, you're choosing what matters. Those stories are not all lies. They are the reasonable edges of a softer erosion. There is a logic to staying in that feels like care. But there is also a quiet subtraction. The friends who stopped calling, the hobbies that fit in the margins until one day they don't fit at all, the city routes you no longer remember because you stopped walking them. You find a rhythm of omission, a gentle, polite narrowing, and before long your days are practiced in a smaller key. Think of anxiety as an architect with soft hands. It does not demolish with a wrecking ball. It trims, reskins, refines, until sunlight comes through fewer windows. You don't feel dramatic loss so much as a diminution, a slow thinning at the edges of who you are. There is grief in that thinning, a modest, private grief that is hard to name to others. It is the feeling you have when you realize a map you once loved no longer includes roads you used to travel. And here is the subtle rescue. Noticing. When you ask yourself, quietly and without judgment, what did I stop doing, and when did it happen? You have already begun to resist. That question is a small hinge. It does not demand grand bravery. It only asks for attention. If you let it sit, it will point to one small thing you can try again. A street you can walk, a call you can answer, a coffee you can keep. These are not leaps. They are careful returns. If this feels like you, tap like a small yes that says, I see this in myself. Share a line in the comments, or join others who are reopening little doors together. Block 11 of 14. You notice the shrinkage like a change in the weather, not sudden, but enough that your shadows fall differently. It begins with a small omission, the coffee you used to grab with a friend, the email you meant to send, the street you once took because it felt alive, and then the omissions stack, polite and patient, until the world fits into a smaller map. You learn to call this efficiency. You call it being sensible. And for a while, the relief of lessness feels like wisdom. There is a particular manner to how this happens. Anxiety does not slam doors. It asks to keep them ajar. It recommends staying home as a kindness to yourself. It suggests avoiding the party as though you're conserving energy. You comply because compliance is a quicker route to peace than argument. Each concession is its own small kindness until those kindnesses have built a room around you. You can't always point to the exact moment the lines changed. Sometimes it's a season, sometimes a restless night. What you can do is name the aperture it left, a calendar with fewer marks, stairs you stopped climbing, hands you stopped shaking. There is a grief here that isn't dramatic. It lives in the spaces where noise used to sit, the empty chair at a cafe, the unread invitation sitting patient in your phone. It asks you a single, quiet question. What did you stop doing, and when did it happen? Naming is not an accusation. It is the first gentleness you offer yourself. To notice that your life has narrowed is already a small act of rebellion. You do not have to reopen everything at once. Expansion can be a careful series of returns. A single walk down a street you avoided, a short yes to someone you barely know, a coffee that is simply a coffee with no expectations attached. If this feels like a mirror, you are not alone. If the thought lands with you, tap like. If you agree, say so. Share one small thing you stopped doing and the moment you remember. There is a community here that remembers how to widen again, together. You notice it in the spaces between plans, an empty coffee date that never got rearranged, a bookmarked event that slowly loses its edges, a street you begin to skirt as if it were a weather system. You tell yourself sensible things, rest, choice, boundaries, and they are true. But there is a quieter truth beside them, a thinning. The parts of you that once reached, that risked small embarrassment for the sake of curiosity, have learned to prefer the warm, predictable light of home. Anxiety is not a siren, you remember. It is a soft amplifier that raises the volume on small dangers until the world seems crowded and loud. It does not demand drama. It asks only that you favor avoidance. Over time, that favor becomes habit, and habit wears down the threshold of your days. The door that used to open for you now nudges closed more easily. You adapt without headlines. There is relief in fewer demands, in fewer disappointments, and that relief feels, at first, like a quiet victory. But victories can be furtive thieves. They take from you the landscapes you once trusted, the accidental conversations, the purposeless wandering, the 2-hour detour that taught you something new about yourself. There is a modest grief here, the kind that does not convene condolences. It is the sadness of muted colors, of rooms you walk through less often. It is not dramatic. It is a neat, patient erasure. And yet, in the act of naming it, you find a small resistance. To notice is already to have tilted your head toward a different horizon. You do not have to mount a grand comeback. You only need to return, carefully, to one small thing you once did without overthinking. Let it be a coffee, a street, a line in a book you used to love. Ask yourself, What did you stop doing, and when did it happen? If that question lands like a pebble in your shoe, you are not imagining things. If you feel a soft recognition, if you nod, if the chest tightens, like this, you are not alone. There are others making these same small returns. If this resonates, give it a like, and step into the quiet company of people gently widening their days again. You wake and the room is the same size, but something about its edges has gone soft. Once there was a margin of possibility, a corridor you could step into without thinking, and now you find yourself pausing at the threshold, cataloging reasons to stay. The small decisions build like dust. One skipped coffee with a friend, one text unanswered, a street avoided because the noise might be too loud. They are polite retreats, tiny accommodations to an invisible rule you did not sign up for. Over months, the map of your days redraws itself not with fireworks, but with pencil strokes, erasing routes until the world fits more neatly inside a worry. You tell yourself comfort is progress. You praise the relief of fewer obligations. It's easier, safer. You learn the language of avoidance like a second tongue. Soft refusals, careful scheduling, the practice smile that keeps things passable. But there is another ledger, quieter, the list of things you used to do without thinking. The cinema seat you stopped booking. The corner bakery you passed by because conversations there felt like work. The late-night bus you no longer catch because the dark now feels like something to manage rather than to move through. There is a strange, modest grief in this contraction. It arrives without ceremony, without a single dramatic loss to point to. Instead, it is a thinning, a subtraction of small joys whose absence accumulates until you realize you are not only avoiding the world, you are also losing access to parts of yourself. And yet noticing this is not a condemnation. It is the first gentle resistance. Awareness is a small, steady act of reclamation. It does not demand leaps. It asks for cataloging. What did you stop doing, and when did it happen? Ask it like a friend, not an accuser. If this lands with you, pause a moment and name one small thing you once did that you miss. If you feel that quiet recognition, like or nod, a soft signal that you are seen. You are not the only one whose life has quietly shrunk. There are others holding the same question, ready to make small, careful returns together. You notice it most in the small quiets. The empty chair at a cafe table you used to claim without thought. The invitation you no longer answer because the idea of the room feels heavy in your chest. The street you walk around now, not through. None of it arrived like a storm. It slid in like dusk, soft, inevitable, changing colors so slowly you only recognize the evening when the lights are on. You adapted with kindness to yourself. You learned the relief of a home that answers back in familiar ways. You learned the safety of a schedule that fits like a glove. Those were not failures. They were sensible responses to a world that sometimes felt too bright. But somewhere between reasonable caution and quiet exile, corners of you thinned. Hobbies you meant to return to collected dust. Friendships shifted into messages that took longer to write, then stopped arriving at all. You kept the pieces that made sense, and in doing so, you lost some of the rooms. This is not dramatic. There are no collapses, no one-line warnings. The loss is a series of small absences. The grief is the kind that collects under everyday light, almost invisible to others. Yet when you name it, when you trace the first times you turned away, something changes. Naming is not a grand cure. It is a tiny unshielding. It is a place to begin again. Begin with one small return. A coffee at the table you used to take for granted. A phone call that says nothing monumental but says, I am still here. Allow the discomfort to be manageable, not heroic. Let the world test you in increments you can hold. Each small step is less about courage and more about gentle reclamation. If this quiet ache felt familiar, you are not alone. If these words touched something you've been avoiding, mark that recognition. Tap like or leave a simple me too. Share what you reclaimed or what you want to try. There are others listening, soft and steady, ready to unshrink with you.